Hey guys, so today I am doing a comparison that really no one asked for. Actually, maybe one person did. This is the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 lens versus the Sony SEL35 f1.8, which I'm using to record this video right now. So let's get started. Alright, so here are the lenses next to each other. As you can see, the Sigma is mounted and it is quite large. This is the MC11 adapter and the lens itself. In comparison, the Sony 35 is significantly smaller. So we're looking at about a third of the length and probably maybe a fourth or a fifth of the weight. It's much lighter than this giant Sigma lens. So these are the two lenses that we are comparing. So now let's go ahead and take a look at some sample images from both of these lenses side by side. All right, so this first picture is a portrait of my wife. Now in all of these shots I did use a tripod. Optical steady shot was off. Now the problem with these two lenses is one is obviously much larger and heavier than the other, and my tripod is not the most sturdy tripod in the world. So if you see that the crops are a little different from left to right, that is why. So I'm gonna start here, and what I will do is I will put all of the Sony 35mm images on the left, and I will put all of the Sigma images on the right. So let me switch these. Okay, so here we go. Let's go ahead and get started. So this first portrait, as you can tell, not much of a difference here. The colors are a little more warm with the Sigma 18-35. Now the settings are listed up here. This one was shot at f1.8 and a large portion of these were shot at f1.8 because I think that when you shoot lenses wide open, they are very telling as far as their performance is concerned. So let's zoom in. We're looking at center sharpness. And these two are very, very close. However, if you look at the eye here, I would definitely say that the Sigma is a bit sharper. Not by much, but a little bit. Looking at the bokeh, the Sony bokeh looks a little creamier to me, but you have more defined circles with the Sigma, so it's more of just a preference. If you look at the images as a whole, they are very, very similar. But as far as sharpness is concerned, center sharpness, this is a slight victory for the Sigma lens, I think. So this next shot, again, the Sony on the left, Sigma on the right. This is just a shot of a house. Let's look at center sharpness. Alright, so not much of a difference here. Looking at the bricks, they're about the same. I think the image on the Sigma is slightly nicer as far as color, but that's not a very big difference at all. So there's not much of a difference in the center. Let's take a look at the corners. Okay, so here I would say that the Sony looks sharper to me. There is some chromatic aberration with both lenses. It's quite minimal actually, surprisingly. But as far as the image sharpness, I think that the Sony has it in the corner. Let's take a look at the other corner just to make sure. Yeah, you can definitely see more sharpness. So out of these two, I think the victory goes to the Sony. So the next image here is another portrait in front of that same house. So this is my wife again, and this is again shot at f1.8. Let's see if there is much of a discernible difference in sharpness. Again, I apologize that these are a little bit off as far as crop because again, the weight of the lens makes a difference. So if you look at the eyes, I would definitely say the Sigma is sharper here, not by much, but by a small amount. Going out to the hair, also looks like the Sigma is a little bit sharper. Now, let me see if I can just compare these one after the other. Yeah. So there's not much of a difference here. I mean, you really have to be pixel peeping to notice much. The colors are a little different. So the Sony colors are actually quite nice. They're a little bit brighter on the face. The Sigma colors are a little bit more subdued. So there's more highlights on the Sony, less so on the Sigma. And what's interesting is the background. If you could see the house here in the background of the Sony, there's a bit of what looks like barrel distortion. If you switch over to the Sigma, there's less of that background barrel distortion. Just an interesting side note. Both images are pretty creamy in the background. So this is a pretty much tie. It really depends on what you're looking for. I like both of these images pretty equally, although I have to say that the Sony is framed more correctly. But anyway. All right, here's another picture of a house here. And again, both of these are done at 35 millimeters. And this is shot at f10, so I want to look at center and corner sharpness from both of these. Now I should say that I shot both of these lenses with autofocus enabled. So let's take a look at the center of these two. Okay, so Sony looks sharper right away by a large margin. Let's take a look at the corners here. Yeah, Sony's definitely sharper than the Sigma. Let's look at this corner here. Again, Sony is sharper. So this image, although from a distance it looks like it is in focus, I think that the Sigma misfocused on this shot. So in this case, the Sony wins, but again, it's a matter of focus because the Sigma is not that soft of a lens, especially at f10. So this is a victory for the Sony, but really not much of a victory because if properly focused, the Sigma would probably be sharper than the Sony. But this is a good example of the differences between these two lenses because the Sony really does not miss focus very frequently, whereas the Sigma has about a 90% success rate. I think that the success rate with the Sony is probably closer to 98%. Just something for all of you guys to be aware of. With the Sony lens, because it's native, you will miss focus on fewer shots than with a Sigma lens or any other adapted lens for that matter. So this next shot is of a tree here and some bokeh. So this is again f1.8. And I was just curious as to sharpness in the center. Both of these focused properly on the tree trunk. Yeah, the Sigma lens looks much better here. And I've noticed this with images from the 35mm lens from Sony. In fact, one of the subscribers emailed me months ago with some sample images, and he was seeing a lot of this purple ghosting fringing in his shots, and I thought it was quite unusual, but it does show up every once in a while with the Sony 35mm lens. As you can probably tell between these two, the Sigma is much sharper, more detailed, definitely a better image. As far as bokeh, they're about equal. Okay, and the last shot here is another portrait of my wife. So as you can tell from a distance, both of these images look identical. There's really not much of a difference at all. However, if we zoom in, let's see if we notice much. Yeah, both look pretty sharp. If you look at the eyes, if I had to give the advantage to one, I would give it to the Sigma. Yeah, you notice that more with the detail in the hair. But the Sony is not a bad lens at all, and unless you are really zooming in and looking at all of these pixels, you will be hard pressed to see the difference between these two. Yeah, definitely a win for the Sigma here. So that is it for the side-by-side comparison. Overall, I'm very impressed with how the Sigma performed, and in fact, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because this is very typical of every comparison that I've ever done with a Sigma and a native Sony lens. I'm remembering back when I compared the Sony 35mm lens to the Sigma 30mm f1.4 lens, and the result was very, very similar. The Sigma lens was optically a superior lens, however the Sony beat it in size and the fact that it is native. So it focuses faster, it focuses more accurately, it's smaller, it has optical steady shot, and really the same principles apply to this comparison. While the Sigma 18-35 is optically a superior lens, there are some drawbacks and some limitations. One is obviously the size. So for travel, it's not ideal. However, if you are a professional and you have a large bag, then it's not really a big issue. Number two, the autofocus is not as accurate with the Sigma lens and the MC11 Sigma adapter, but that is to be expected because every single lens that I have tested that is non-native has struggled in the area of autofocus. And struggled, I say loosely, because it is very difficult to live up to native focusing on the a6000 and a6300. The focusing system is just so fast and very, very accurate. The third drawback of this lens is the autofocus noise, and that's something that I wasn't expecting, but you do hear it in video. Here's just a sample. So if you are recording on an external sound device, that's not an issue, but if you are planning on using the audio from your a6000 or a6300 or a6500, that is something that you should be aware of. The Sony 35mm is silent. So that's really it for the drawbacks of this lens. I guess you could say that it doesn't have optical steady shot, but if you have an a6500, that's really not a concern. It is a pricey lens, especially when you add the MC11 adapter. Now I should mention this again because when you go to Amazon, you can choose the Sony option of this lens, which does not work for Sony E-mount. That is an A-mount lens. There is no Sigma 18-35 f1.8 that is native to the E-mount. So the version that I have here is actually the Canon mount, and I'm using the MC11 adapter, which is a Canon EF to Sony E lens adapter. So enough of the negatives. What are the positives with this lens? Well, I have to say, number one, I was impressed with the colors. Number two, I was impressed with the sharpness. Number three, I was impressed with how good this lens is at macro shots because you can focus on items that are so close to the lens. Here's just an example. And here's what you can do with the Sony 35mm. So again, there's a difference there. And number four really is the fact that you have this range of 18 to 35, which is so unique. There's no native Sony lens that is that wide and that fast. There is no such thing as a 16mm f1.8 lens that's native to E-mount. I wish there was. I wish Sony would make it, but there is no such thing. So this is the closest thing you can get to a really fast medium wide angle, apart from looking at something like the Rokinon 12mm f2. And because you can zoom at a constant f1.8 aperture, you can create shots such as this one, which is pretty cool. So at the end of the day, the lesson that is learned is there is no such thing as a perfect lens for your camera. This Sigma is very, very good though. Any lens will have compromises. Even the Zeiss lenses are not perfect, and you can look at my past videos to prove that to you. It really depends on what you are looking for and what you are willing to sacrifice. In my opinion, the Sony 35mm f1.8 is still an amazing lens, even though optically it falls a little bit short of this Sigma. When you factor in the size and the fact that it has optical steady shot and the fact that it's lightweight, easy to carry around, it really is a great lens, and it is cheaper than this one. So that is going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. If you guys have questions about either one of these lenses, be sure to comment down below. If you have experience with one or the other or both, comment down below. Always interested in reading your comments as to what you think about these lenses. As well as if you have recommendations for future comparisons. That's where I get the majority of my video ideas, is from you guys, the subscribers. So thank you guys for all the support. Thanks for all the likes and all the comments. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.